Welcome back. In this video, I'll be covering Learning Objective 11.3. Describe the situations in which people are more likely or less likely to help others. For PSY 235, Social Psychology. In this section of the chapter, we're shifting our attention from individual and cultural variables to looking at situational factors. The name of the game in social psychology is social influence. So how do factors in the situation affect the likelihood that people will engage in prosocial behavior? Some of the early research in this area really emphasized the nature of our surroundings. So one of the first kind of arguments that was made was that there should be, based on the nature of the environment, differences in level of prosocial behavior. So one broad comparison that you could make is, are urban environments, so high population density environments, different from suburban environments? And are those different from rural environments? And you could ask, your authors propose this scenario. Suppose you're walking down the street one day, you see a man fall down and cry out with pain. He shows a bandaged leg, there's bleeding. What are you going to do? And the answer to that question really depends on the context. What's the situation like? When researchers initially did studies like this, and they went to very small towns, about half the people who walked by stopped and offered to help. When they did this in larger cities, that 50% dropped to 15%. Now, at first, you may say to yourself, well, that's because people in cities don't care about each other. That is a far too simplistic answer, and we'll be exploring that in the coming slides. Other studies have found that people in small towns are more likely to give assistance for a wide range of helping contexts, like finding a lost kid, finding a lost pet, giving directions, returning a lost object, all kinds of things. So there is a significant amount of research that shows that these small density, low density, population density environments tend to involve more prosocial acts than in high density environments. Now the question becomes, why? The early kind of theories were, because people in urban environments get callous and they lose empathy. That is, again, too simplistic. So one of the early hypotheses was something called the urban overload hypothesis. And in this hypothesis, if you're in a high population density space, there's a lot of cognitive load in that environment. There's a lot of more noise, more people, more things competing for your attention. Urban dwellers, if you pluck them up, if you take a New Yorker and you put them instead of in New York City, in upstate New York, where the population density is lower, they're more likely to be helpful, just like anyone else in that less stimulating environment. So the urban overload hypothesis says that you take those urban city dwellers and you put them in a calmer, less overloaded, cognitively overloaded environment, they should be just as helpful as anyone else. And research has supported this. And a lot of it has to do with the fact of the cognitively overloaded nature of high population density environments. And there have been a lot of field studies conducted in cities across the United States. When the population density is taken into consideration, the density is what predicts the helping. It's not the overall population. So if you have a very densely packed area of even a smaller city, that densely packed area is going to show less prosocial behavior than a more loosely packed area of the same city. So it's really the density of people as opposed to the overall population. So the idea here is that when we look at all of these studies together, when you are massed in a large group, it's very hard to attend to any single individual. It can be cognitively overloaded. It can be too distracting. Your attention may be so overwhelmed that you can't even see that other people are in need. So the urban overload hypothesis reminds us that city dwelling doesn't make us callous, but being embedded in large, dense groups of other people may interfere with our ability to make decisions that are prosocial in nature. Another factor that can influence the degree to which we are prosocial toward our neighbors is something referred to as residential mobility. In comparison to decades long ago, Americans in particular, we move a lot more now. So in comparison to my parents' generation, my mother is in her 80s, when she was growing up, the norm was you got out of high school, you got a home of your own, you raised your family, you stayed in that home, and you stayed in that home until you died. And that was the expectation. So in her generation, everybody knew their neighbors and they knew their business. And you were not mobile. You lived and grew and raised your children around the same group of people. Now, in modern America, that is not the norm. People move frequently, and they often don't just move within the same city. They move state to state, even country to country. So when you move more often, you are less connected to the people around you. You're less aware of who they are and what they need. You're less concerned because you don't know them. So residential mobility, when it is high, it can actually reduce prosocial behavior. Because what's been found in research is people who have been in the same place for a long time, they're much more likely to do prosocial acts to help the people they live near, that live around them. Why do they do this? Partly because if you've been in a place for a long time, you're going to feel more attached. Your community will be a part of your identity. You'll also be more interdependent on the people who live near you. If you've been with them for a fairly long period of time. And it's also, there's a more tactical concern. If you are not the helpful neighbor, if you are the bad neighbor, other people won't like you. And one way you can secure your reputation in your community and also feed that norm of reciprocity is to be nice to your neighbors, and then they will be nice to you. Now, looking at situations and how they impact prosocial acts, many of you are already aware of what the bystander effect is. So here's a little video example.
You're walking down the sidewalk on your way to work. Now watch that woman in front of you. Suddenly, she collapses. What would you do? Before you answer, take a look at this real security camera footage that caused public outrage last year.
Disturbing video emerging tonight.
When this woman in a New York waiting room collapses in 2008, hospital staff ignore her for an agonizing 45 minutes. When someone finally comes to her aid, it's too late. But aren't we better than that? Wouldn't the average person step in to help? We decide to find out. It's rush hour on a busy street in Newark as commuters head to the train station. This woman falls hard. But don't be alarmed, it's veteran stunt woman Stephanie Stokes-Mai. And our What Would You Do cameras are here to see what happens next. And sure enough, some people walk right by. But within just 4 seconds,
Hello, you all right?
Good Samaritan Diane Coward stops to call 911. All day long, when it comes to Stephanie, the good people of Newark, it seems, are up to any challenge.
Okay.
Time after time.
Stay right there. Help us coming, okay? Thank you.
You're welcome, miss.
But before we give Newark our our coveted What Would You Do humanitarian award, we wonder, what if instead of this well-dressed woman, we substituted this homeless man? Suddenly, Newark isn't so sure. Now, no one is so eager to step in to help stuntman Mick O'Rourke. This woman takes a good long look, but keeps on going.
He's a human being and he needs help.
But you didn't stop.
Because what can I do? Sir, are you okay?
But eventually, others do step forward.
Sir, are you okay?
And if they didn't always want to touch, many were willing to touch 3 buttons.
911 with emergency. A man fell out. I don't know if he's dead or alive or what. The guy should lay on the ground. I don't know if it's okay.
How you doing, sir? When we asked them later why they helped, they all had similar answers.
You gotta help them. They need help, help them. Just reach out. What if it was you? What if it was me? I need somebody to help me.
But facts are facts. In our experiment, Stephanie is always helped within 6 seconds. With Mick, it takes an average of 3 minutes. Still, that's better than what happened in Washington, D.C. just last month.
What's more disturbing is the number of people who walk by the injured man and never stop to help.
After this homeless man is attacked, hitting his head on the car behind him, he lies on the street unaided. People stop to look. They go by, even load their groceries. But it takes 19 minutes before someone finally calls 911. By then, it's too late. The man dies of his injuries. But would he have been treated differently if he hadn't been homeless?
The homeless are probably one of the most negatively stereotyped groups in our society.
Jack DeVidio, a social psychologist at Yale University. And God forbid they're holding a beer can.
If they're holding a beer can, it gives us the explanation, the excuse not to get involved and still believe we're the good people in the situation.
And that certainly seemed to be the case when Mick fell once more, this time carrying alcohol. We waited.
Our beautiful view of New Jersey.
And waited.
Hello? Oh, wait. What is this? What is this dead?
And waited. In all, 88 people go by, and we're beginning to think no one will ever step up to the plate. But then we meet this most extraordinary woman.
Excuse me. Excuse me.
Linda Hamilton, who police tell us is sometimes homeless herself.
Excuse me. Can somebody call this man the ambulance? Excuse me. Could you call him the ambulance?
A lone voice asking for help. But unbelievably, 26 more people walk by, ignoring her. That beautiful face of hers, shaking, somberly.
What she can see is people being callous and uncaring, the cruelty in the world, but there's kind of sadness there.
Hey, could you call an ambulance for this man? Could you call an ambulance?
Finally, Linda Hamilton's courageous example turns the tide.
911, where's your emergency?
Hi, I'm a passerby, but there's a man out on the street. He's passed out.
When we speak to Good Samaritan Batul Philizman later, incredibly enough, she says she stopped because she remembered that videotape from Washington.
I didn't want the same things to happen to this gentleman.
Once she steps in, others do too. This man improvises a pillow.
Hey, open your eyes. It's still here.
She gave the homeless man a name. She said, "I'll call you Billy." And she tried to comfort him. The actor playing the homeless guy was so touched He said, I felt like she was an angel.
And she was an angel. By giving him the name Billy, she really created a personal connection. She had a bond with that person that nobody else was even willing to consider.
Open your eyes.
Even after our cameras come out, Linda Hamilton is still looking out for him.
You all right? Don't worry about it.
Amidst the hubbub of getting releases signed and interviewing passersby, our savior, Linda Hamilton, slowly taps her way down the street, reminding us, inviting us all to consider, just for a moment, what would you do?
So that video shows you a lot of variables in play. When we think about the bystander effect, one of the the crafty things that the What Would You Do series did all those years ago was to show how you can manipulate certain variables, and it alters almost immediately, sometimes in dramatic ways, the choices that people make. They did a manipulation that had two prongs to it. Their first victim was a well-dressed woman who appeared to be, dressed in a suit with a nice coat, with a briefcase. She falls. So she's both female and well-dressed. And let's be honest, white. When you have those variables and a person appears to be in distress, that person will tend to receive more assistance more quickly than other kinds of victims. And then they switched it up to a not well-dressed, scruffy-looking, kind of dirty-looking man who presents the stereotype of being homeless. He gets way less help. Then if they add another situational cue, a beer can, he gets even less help without, extraordinary efforts on the part of one good Samaritan who happens to empathize with other people who have been homeless. So let's take a deeper look at what the bystander effect is and why it happens. In the video, they gave you a couple of news events where you had really, really devastating, tragic outcomes that were driven by the bystander effect, where you had people who actually died because other people just did not see them as worthy of assistance or didn't see what was happening as an emergency. So let's take apart the bystander effect and look at how it works. The bystander effect was initially studied by Latney and Darley, and they really wanted to shed some light on situational determinants of helping. There had been, big newsworthy events in fairly large cities where individuals were victims of crimes and nobody came to their aid, even though there were many, many witnesses. And originally, the argument was, it's cities, it's people in cities. They don't care about other people. They're callous, they're cold, they're brutal, and they just don't care. Latney and Darley were like, I don't think so. I don't think it's that simple. Instead, what they suggested was that they could, just like the What Would You Do videographers, they could set up a situation to either increase helping or decrease it simply based on the number of people present. And their theory was that the more people who are around to witness an emergency, the less likely they will be to render any kind of assistance. And then there are a whole bunch of other variables that they played with. They started out in 1970 with very simple, simply designed experiments that they did in the laboratory. Then they went out into the world and did field studies and field experiments, and they manipulated many, many, many more variables to kind of test the model in its full form. You start with the fact that the more bystanders who are around to witness an emergency, the less likely any of them are going to provide assistance. Now, if you look at the whole decision-making model, and this is a graphic from your textbook, and the illustration shows that there are 5 steps in that are part of the process of making a decision to help in an emergency. So first off, remember, this is an emergency kind of situation, and you need to decide in the moment whether or not to render aid. So the illustration shows 5 steps that people go through before helping someone in an emergency. First, you have to actually notice that there's a problem. If you're embedded in a crowd, crowds are distracting. They are noisy. They cognitively overload us, and we may not notice that there's an emergency occurring. Just simple fact, if you're buried in a crowd, you may not see what's happening as a problem. Step 2, you have to, if you notice the event, so if you've gotten past step 1 and you notice the event, you have to make a judgment. You have to look at what's going on and decide, is it an emergency? Is it not? So let's say you're on that street in the What Would You Do video, and other people have just walked by the person who is laying on the street. They just walked by. That goes into your head as part of the scene. So those people walk by, you're going to walk by next. Well, they walked by, they must know something more than I do, is what may occur in your head. And that's an effect called pluralistic ignorance, where you're interpreting the event as a non-emergency because other people are behaving as if it is a non-emergency. On the other hand, if other people who are around you are responding as if it is an emergency, you will be more likely to follow suit and do what they do. Now, step 3 is taking responsibility for the emergency. If there are more people around, because the bystander effect means at every stage of this decision-making model, the more people who are around, the less likely you are to help. If there are people around and you are saying, okay, is it my job? Do I have to be the one who provides help here? You may say, no, there are other people around. Why does it have to be me? And that's referred to as diffusion of responsibility. And you'll fail to assume responsibility simply because there are other people present. At the very least, you'll be slowed down. When there are other people around, it can slow your decision to assume responsibility. So you'll look at the other people and kind of determine, are they going to help? And you'll wait, you'll pause. And then eventually you may decide to provide assistance, but it's going to slow you down if it doesn't stop you completely. Now, step 4, you can say, yep, it's my job. I'm up to bat. I have to provide some kind of assistance here. Then you have to know what to do. So, in the What Would You Do video, a lot of the people pulled out their cell phones and dialed 911. Now, rest assured, the producers of the show had that rigged so that they had people on the 911 lines. They weren't wasting valuable resources with their little TV show. But most people did that. So they were like, yep, I know what to do. I'll call the cops and they'll know what to do. Or I'll call SWAT and they'll know what to do. Some of the individuals actually stopped, took a pulse, talked to the person, tried to take the female victim, they tried to take her hair out of her eyes, ask if they're okay, those sorts of things. So at stage 4, you have to decide what kind of assistance is needed and what you're capable of, what you have skills to engage in. Sometimes if we don't feel competent, we're not going to dive in. Like, go back to my hayride example that I gave in a different video. The only reason I jumped into the ditch to help the great big giant horse that was stuck in the fence was because I actually grew up on a farm and I know horses. So I felt very competent. The friends that I was with knew nothing about horses and they were like, that's a giant animal. I'm not getting off this wagon. Period. So knowing the appropriate form of assistance and knowing what you're capable of is stage 4. And then in stage 5, you need to actually implement the decision. And like the rest of the model, at any one of these stages, if another person or a group of people is present, it's going to slow you down if it doesn't stop you entirely. So once you've reached, you know what to do, and you have to actually engage in action, that's when people will do a little bit of math in their heads. What are the risks? What are the dangers? What are the costs? And if those costs are too high, they may decide at that point to jump ship and bail, or to take a less costly approach to providing assistance, like making a phone call as opposed to physically engaging. If other people are present, you're more likely to defer to them than to intervene yourself. So that's the basics of the bystander effect. So if we drill down into these just a little bit more, so that you have a full review here, Darley and Batson showed that if you're in a hurry, if we add some more variables here, in addition to just the presence of other people, if you're in a hurry, you're less likely to help. Even if you have just studied a lesson on the Good Samaritan, you are still less likely to help if you're in a hurry. So what that shows is that even when you notice an event, if you're busy, or even if an event is right in front of you, you may not notice it simply because you're preoccupied and you're in a hurry. At the interpretation stage, what researchers have found is that the way other people are behaving is a very, very powerful variable for us when we're making decisions about helping. Pluralistic ignorance is basically driven by our passive interpretation of what other people are doing. So if there are other bystanders around and they're not responding as if something is an emergency, you're going to go, yeah, that's not a problem, and ignore it, or at least ignore it for a while. At the assuming responsibility stage, that's when diffusion of responsibility comes into play. If there are other people around, it's very easy for you to say somebody else has to have more ability to do this. They have more time, they're more available, they're more competent, whatever. The more people are around, the more likely responsibility gets spread out. And then knowing how to help, if there are other people around, you may automatically assume somebody else is more skilled than I am. So in the CPR example that they talk about in your textbook, what should you do if someone collapses in the street in front of you? Should I interpret this as a heart attack? Is it a heat stroke? Is it some other kind of medical emergency? Should I call? Should I administer CPR? If there are other people around, what tends to happen is people start asking each other questions as opposed to immediately rendering assistance. And that can slow people down. If people don't know what form of assistance to give, they will look to others to determine what it should be. And if nobody is thinking about that they know what to do, no help will be rendered, so it will slow everyone down. At the decision-making stage, what can happen there is even if people know what to do, they still may stop themselves. They may decide in the end they're just not the best qualified, and if there are other people around, they may target them to be more qualified. They may worry and be fearful about making a fool of themselves, of making a mistake, of putting themselves in danger, and so on. So there are all kinds of reasons that people can find to not help, and the presence of other people makes it much, much more likely that you will go down that not helping path. Now, the emergence of our online reality has shown us other examples of how diffusion of responsibility can occur. Diffusion of responsibility is really easy to demonstrate online, especially when you have people who make a request of a large group. So if you put out a call for help online, what can happen is that the vast majority of people who see that call for help, since they cannot be personally identified, their sense of personal responsibility gets diffused. And they will say, well, somebody else will do it. I don't need to donate to that cause. Other people will take care of it. And nobody's going to know that I'm not donating anyway. So online allows people to hide really, really easily. It also allows them to behave more aggressively. And we'll talk about that in the next chapter. So kind of tuck that away in the back of your mind. When people are called out by name, however, so think about, Facebook, for example. You can pick a charity for your birthday on Facebook, and you can put that out there to your friends. People are significantly more likely to actually donate if you tag them by name. Then they feel more called out and more responsible for actually doing donations. If you just put the call out but you don't tag friends, your friend list is far less likely to donate. So Helping Behavior 101, if you want to raise money for a cause, tag people by name. Now, media effects also matter when we're looking at helping behavior or prosocial behavior. If people can see other people acting in prosocial ways, or either in fiction or documentaries or even in video games, does it make them more cooperative? So in some research, what they did was they had, in this particular study, and you can read more of the details in your textbook, but basically, if they were playing a neutral video game that didn't have prosocial themes in the video game, that's the yellow on the chart, people who played the video game that was neutral were less likely to help in all three different helping situations. If they had played a prosocial video game where the goal of the game was to be helpful, to help others, then helping went up in all three helping situations, regardless of what type of helping situation it was. So even if we're exposed in media, and remember how in that What Would You Do video, one of the last women that they talked to, she had seen the news report of the homeless person who was beat to death in the street and then left laying there by all those bystanders. She had seen it, and because she saw it, she was more likely to respond when asked to provide assistance. So when we are exposed to prosocial behaviors, it tends to carry over. Why? Because it's been made available in memory. So if you see information that makes being helpful salient, you are more likely to be helpful the next time you have an opportunity. And research suggests in a wide range of contexts that that's the case. That concludes my coverage of Learning Objective 11.3. In the next video, and it'll be a short one, we'll be covering Learning Objective 11.4, explain what can be done to increase prosocial behavior.